When you open it, you'll get a message at the top. You just need to click on Enable Content and then press Yes. Okay, you should now have your database looking like this. If we go back to the task, which should be on the screen at the front, you need to have a look to start with at question 1. You only need to show in the report the fields ID, forename, surname, allergy, amount paid and outstanding balance. It also only needs to show students from HA10. So to do that, you first need to create a query. So as always, you go to Create, Query Design. We've only got one table, so you just press Add and then Close. You might need to keep checking back to see which fields you need to include, but they are ID, forename, surname, and then it was allergy, amount paid and outstanding balance. Allergy, amount paid and outstanding balance. Now we also only needed to show people from HA10, so we've also got to include form. But if we look back at the task, it doesn't say that we need to show the field form. So what we're going to do, we're going to untick this box that says show so that it won't appear later on. But it means that we can then type in there HA10, and if we run it, you'll see that although we can't see the field form, it's still only showing the people that are in HA10. Go back into design view, and it's probably a good idea to save it at this point. So if we just call it HA10, then we'll be able to find it again later on. Okay, we now need to do this part of the task. So we need to create a new field called amount paid in euros, which is calculated at runtime. This means that it will recalculate every time you open up the query. The field needs to be displayed in euros to 2 decimal places with an exchange rate of £1 equaling 1.25 euros. So to do this, you need to go back to your database and make sure that you've got your HA10 query open in design view, which looks like this. If you haven't, right click on it over here, click on design view, and it'll look like this. Then in the next available column, so the first blank one, click in it and then click on builder, and this will open up the expression builder. The first part that you type in is going to be the name of your new field, so just make sure that it's spelled exactly the same, amount paid in euros. Then afterwards you need to put the formula that's going to calculate this. To do that, we need to go into the database, into the table called school trip, and choose the amount paid. We then have to times it, so a star, by 1.25. For some reason, sometimes you get this EXPR appear. If you just delete that, it'll stop you getting any error messages. Press OK, and then test that it works by clicking on Run. As you can see, you've got a new field. At the moment it's not displayed in euros, but we'll come on to that later. Okay, by this point you've completed part 1 and part 2. We now need to go on to part 3, which starts talking about how the report's going to look. So it needs to fit on a single page, it needs to have a page orientation of landscape, and we need to sort the data into ascending order of surname. Part 6, 7, 8, 9 we come on to later. So going back to your database, we can now close this query, making sure that you save it, and then we need to click on Create at the top and go to Report Wizard. You'll then get this window open up, and it asks you which query or which table you want to base your report on. Now it's automatically on mine chosen the HA10 query. If it hasn't on yours, just make sure you select HA10. We then have to include all of the fields that we have in this table. Those are the ones that were listed at the start here: ID, forename, surname, allergy, amount paid, outstanding balance, and a new one called amount paid in euros. So you can see that all those are listed there. If we then press next, it asks us if we want to group it. It doesn't ask us to group it, so we can just press next. This part asks you whether you want to sort the data. If you remember back to the question, it asked you to sort it in ascending order by surname. On this part, it asks you how you want it to look. Again, remembering back to the question, it said that it needed to fit to one page, which is this tick box down here. Adjust the field width so they all fit on a page, and it needed to be landscape. If it isn't already, make sure that you select it as tabular, as it makes it easier to edit later on. Press next. It then says, do you want a title for your report? At the moment, we can just leave it as HA10, however we might need to change it later on. Make sure preview the report is selected, click on finish, and it will create your report for you. As you can see, it all fits on one page. However, there are some problems in that you can't see the amount paid in euros title, and we still haven't yet set this to be euros and to 2 decimal places. So we need to do some editing on it. To do that, right click on the report and go to design view. In here you can then start moving things around so that it all fits nicely on the page. You need to watch the next video to see. Okay, first you need to make sure that all the fields display on the report and they don't hang off the edge, or for instance on allergy here you can't see the whole word. So to do that, all you do is click on the boxes and resize them to a size that you think is going to be suitable. Try and keep them nicely in line. If you hold down Control and you click on the second one, you'll be able to highlight them both and move them across. For some reason it's put surname first, perhaps because we sorted it by it, so what I'm going to do is just swap those over so it's in a more sensible order. So just hold Control and click the next one and you can edit both at the same time. Or you can just draw a box across them like that. However, it don't seem to work. Okay, so just make that one a little bit bigger so you can see it. Yours might be different to this, it'll depend which computer you're working on. So they're perhaps a little bit bigger than they need to be. Okay, you can just then preview it by clicking on this button up here like you did with the queries and the table, and it will reopen it and you can see it as it will look when it prints out. As you can see, this time it fits a lot nicer on the page and we can see all the titles. We still need to edit this here so that it appears in euros and make sure that there's always 2 decimal places. We then also need to make sure that we've got the title at the top, HA10, and that you've got your name and centre number in the footer, and also we need to create a new calculation which finds out the total deposit paid for all of the students in HA1, and that needs to go at the bottom of the report. Open up the next video to see how. Okay, first we need to change these into euros, so we need to go back into design view and then we need to go across and click on the box that says amount paid in euros. It's the second one down, it's in the detail section. If we right click on it and go to properties, you get the property for that text box, and the third one down is format. If from the drop down box you can select euro, and then underneath you've got decimal places, you need to set it to 2. Check that works again by clicking on the view button, and you can see now we have it in euros and it's all got 2 decimal places. We've already got HA10 at the top, so we don't need to worry about doing that. However, it does say that we need to calculate the total deposit paid for HA1 and place it at the bottom of the report. It also needs to have a label next to it that says total deposit. Open the next video. Okay, at the moment your report should look like this. However, we need to now calculate the total deposit paid for HA1 and put it at the bottom of the report. As you learned earlier in the lesson, the bottom of the report is also called a footer. So if we right click on our report and go to Design View, we can drag down just underneath the report footer a bit of a space. That should be plenty. And you can then create a text box to work out the total amount paid for HA10. So at the top, making sure you've got Design selected under Report Design Tools. The second one across is a text box. If you click on that and then just click once in the report footer, you get a new text box appear. With it still selected, if you've clicked off it, just click back onto it. You should get a property sheet appear on the right. If you don't, right click on it and go to Properties. In there, you need to click on Control Source and click on these three little dots here to open up the expression builder which you'll have seen before. Now we need to do a sum of all of the amount paid. So in functions, in built-in functions, making sure you've got all selected, if you scroll down to S, you'll see that there's one called sum. If you double click on that, it puts in some code for you. We just need to change the expression part by clicking on it and just deleting it. And we want to sum up the amount paid from HA10. So you click on your HA10 query, and in this list here, if you scroll down, you should have amount paid. There's lots of other ones that look like amount paid, but these are just the labels, so you need to scroll down and just select the one that says amount paid. Double click on it, and in square brackets it'll add it to your formula. If you press OK, you can then run it or view it to check that it's worked. As you can see, it says 80, and if you add up the amount paid, 5, 20, 65, 75, 80. So you can see that it's working. However, we need to change this label and we need to set the format of this. So you need to go back to Design View. With this box selected, we need to change the format to currency, not euros, because this is just the amount paid in pounds. And we can just set the decimal places to 2 just to make sure it's correct. We also then need to give the label next to it a name. So if you click on there and double click, you can edit the text. Now the label needed to say total deposit. Click out of it, view it to check that it's all worked. You can now see that the total deposit for HA1 is £80. There's a few last little bits that you now need to do, such as put your name, centre and candidate number on the left hand side of the footer and then save the report. The last video shows. Okay, the last bit that you need to do is you need to put your name, candidate and centre number at the bottom of the page. So go back into Design View, and although the report footer looks like it's below the page footer, when you print it out it's actually the page footer that appears right at the bottom. So we're just going to make a bit more space here, and you need to put a label. It's probably too much. You're going to put a label in with your name, centre number and candidate number. So to do that, you just put a label and you just draw the box where you think it's going to be. It should be big enough, and then literally just type in your name, centre number and candidate number. Then when you view it, you should have right at the bottom of the page your name, centre number and candidate number. Always just double check that you've done everything. So obviously the last thing that we need to do is just click on save to make sure it's saved, and we can then close it. Okay, for task 2 you're going to need to hide a label and hide a field, and the question asks you to hide the ID field and the ID label. So in your database you need to open up your report in design view, and you can see your ID field, which is this one, and label above should be on the left hand side. Now if you hold control down and click on the second one, so they're both selected, in the properties menu, again if it's not there, right click, go to properties at the bottom. The first option is visible, and it's as simple as changing it to no, so that when you view it the ID isn't shown. That's pretty much all you need to do to hide and show a field. Task 5 says that the school wants to send receipts to everybody that's paid a deposit, and that to do that they're going to need to print out some address labels. All the task will say is print out suitable address labels for everybody who has paid a deposit. To find out everyone that's paid a deposit, you've first got to create a query. So make sure that you've got your reports school trip database open and go to create query design. Press add and then close, and then at this point you need to think about which fields are going to be included on an address label. So think about when you get a letter sent, what would be written on the front of it. So it'll have the person's forename and surname, it'll have their address line 1, address line 2 and their postcode. You're also going to have to include deposit paid, although we don't want it to be shown on the label, we need to use it to find out who has paid a deposit. So the only criteria that we've got to type in is under deposit paid, and we're going to put yes. If we then tick this box, it will stop the deposit paid being shown, but it will still only show people that have paid a deposit. When you've done, close the query, give it a sensible name, something like paid deposit for labels. Okay, you can now see that your query, paid deposit for labels, should have appeared on the left hand side. The first thing you need to do is click on it so that it highlights it and it turns orange. You then need to click on create, and then in the report section, underneath the report wizard button that we used last week, you'll see an option for labels. Click on that, and then in the task in the exam it should ask you or tell you what size your label needs to be. If it doesn't, just stick with the one that's at the very top. Press next, and then you can choose the style of font. So if the exam asks you to choose a certain style of font, a serif or a sans serif font, then you can do that here. We're just going to leave it as Arial, size 8. Press next, and at this point it asks you to build up your label. So this is where you're going to make it look like an address label should look, so that you have the name at the top and the postcode at the bottom, so that it looks in a sensible order. So click on the arrow to include forename, and then this is something that people lose marks for. You need to press space before clicking on the arrow for surname, so that it leaves a space between forename and surname. Then press enter so that you're on a new line, and click the arrow for address line 1 and press enter, address line 2, enter, and then postcode, so that your label ends up looking like this. Press next. It then says, do you want to sort your labels? It doesn't ask you to in the exam, so you could just press next. It then asks you for a title. We'll just keep it as it is at the moment. Press finish, and you can see that it's built you some labels. Okay, you'll be glad to hear that this is the last task on databases, and the task is all about exporting data. So the scenario, we're sticking with the school trip, is that the finance department wants to do some calculations on the amount of money that pupils have paid. So she would like a spreadsheet which shows only information from people who have paid a deposit and includes ID, forename, surname, form, year and the amount that they've paid. So to do that, as before, you need to first create a query. So in your database you need to go to Create, Query Design, Add and then Close, and then this is where you need to include the fields that were asked in the question. So they were ID, forename, surname, form, year group, and then it also asked for the amount paid. However, as we only want to show people that have paid a deposit, we also need to include the deposit paid, but we tick the box to say that we don't want it to be shown. In the deposit paid, you need to write yes, press run to check that it works. You can see that only people that have paid a deposit are shown and all the correct information is included. Close and then save this query as something sensible, so list for finance. Press OK and your query will appear on the left hand side. Okay, you now need to export the list into Excel, so click on the list for finance query that you've just created and then go to external data, and then along here above export you've got a number of different options. Now this task asks you to export it as an Excel file, but it could ask to export it as a text file or an XML or a PDF, but it's just the same. So just click on Excel. It then asks where do you want to export it to, so I'm going to export it to my practical skills folder. I've already done this before, so I'm just going to put number 2 on the end. You don't have to do that. Press save. We then want to export it with suitable formatting, so tick this box, and then just to save time we can open the destination file, which will be the Excel file, when it's complete, so tick that box, press OK, and then Excel should open up with your new file created.